The salt was her only companion. It clung to her hair, crusted on her windowsill, and scoured the sorrows from her skin when she waded into the churning gray water. Alara lived on the edge of the world in a driftwood cabin tucked into a stony cove where the northern sea gnawed endlessly at the land. She was a healer, or what passed for one in exile. She knew which seaweeds soothed a burn and which mosses staunched a bleed. The tides told her their secrets, and the wind, a constant, lonely howl, was a language she had come to understand. Her old pack had cast her out 5 winters ago, a useless omega, they had called her. Barren. Cursed. Her stepsister Briar had looked on with eyes that held a chilling, triumphant satisfaction. Ilara hadn't fought it. The accusations were just stones piled on a mountain of worthlessness she had been carrying her whole life. So she had walked, following the coast until the pack lands were a distant memory, and found this place of wind and water and silence. Here, her hands were useful. She tended her garden of hardy herbs, dug for clams at low tide, and spoke only to the gulls. It was a small life, a quiet life, but it was hers. The constant ache of loneliness was a physical thing, a cold stone in her belly, but she had learned to live with it, just as she had learned to live with the chilblains on her fingers and the permanent scent of brine in her clothes. The storm that brought him was a monster. It threw itself at the coast for 2 days, a screaming tantrum of wind and water. Alara bolted her shutters and fed her small hearth, listening to the sea roar. On the 3rd morning, an unnatural quiet fell. The world outside was bruised and battered, littered with the sea's debris. It was on her dawn patrol for salvageable timber that she found them. He was a giant of a man, half sprawled against a great black rock, his dark hair plastered to his skull. A deep gash ran from his temple into his hairline, stark and bloody against his pale skin. But it wasn't him that made her heart seize. It was the small, trembling bundle clutched in the crook of his arm. A wolf pup, no bigger than her 2 hands, its fur a matted, sorry gray. It was shivering violently, its tiny body racked with a cold that seemed to come from its very bones. The man was unconscious, his breathing shallow. A king in any other setting, all broad shoulders and harsh, beautiful lines, now brought low by the sea. But Alara's focus was on the pup. Its life was a flickering candle flame in the wind. She touched its flank. It was cold. Dangerously cold. She couldn't leave them. Her conscience, the one soft thing that had survived her exile, wouldn't allow it. Getting the man back to her cabin was an exercise in brutal effort. He was impossibly heavy, a dead weight of muscle and bone. She half dragged, half carried him, her own small frame screaming in protest, the wet sand sucking at her boots. She settled him on the floor by her hearth, his head on her only spare blanket, and then turned her full attention to the pup. She wrapped it in the driest, softest rags she owned and held it close to her chest, trying to force her own meager warmth into its tiny, shivering form. She dripped a little warmed water and honey into its mouth with her finger. It swallowed weakly, a flicker of instinct. Hope, a fragile and unfamiliar bird, fluttered in her chest. She spent the day like that, tending to both of them. She cleaned and stitched the man's head wound, her fingers deft and practiced. His skin was cold, an unnatural chill that had nothing to do with the sea. It was a deep, embedded cold, like a glacier lived inside him. She piled her blankets over him, stoked the fire until the small cabin was sweltering, but the chill remained. The pup lay nestled in her lap. Its shivering had eased, but its breathing was becoming shallow, each tiny puff of air a struggle. She watched its sides, her own breath catching with every faltering rise and fall. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her professional calm. She was a healer. She did not let things die. Night fell. The man had not stirred. The fire cast flickering shadows on his face, making the harsh planes and angles seem even more severe. He was beautiful in the way a winter storm was beautiful. Remote, powerful, and utterly merciless. Guilt pricked at her. She hadn't even checked him for other injuries, so consumed was she with the pup. As if summoned by her fear, the moment came. The pup's chest gave a final, tiny shudder. And then, it was still. No. The word was a silent scream in her head. She stared, disbelieving, at the small, perfect body in her arms. The stillness was absolute. The little life she had fought so hard for had been snuffed out. Grief, sharp and overwhelming, crashed over her. It was stupid. A stray pup. A dying thing she had found on a beach. But its fight had mirrored her own. Its struggle to survive in a world too big and too cold had been her struggle. And it had lost. Something inside her refused to accept it. A stubborn, defiant rage that had been dormant for years. She would not let this happen. Without thinking, she brought the pup's face to hers. She covered its tiny snout and mouth with her own lips. And she breathed. 1 breath. 2. She poured her own air, her own warmth, her own desperate will to live into its still form. She breathed for it. A gentle puff, then a pause. Another. The motions were automatic, dredged up from some forgotten lesson, but the feeling was pure, raw instinct. Live. The command echoed in the hollows of her soul. Live. She pressed her ear to its chest. Nothing. She breathed again, and again. Her vision started to swim. Her own lungs burned. She felt a strange warmth spread from her chest, down her arms, a tingling heat that pooled in her palms and centered on her lips. It felt like sunshine. She breathed one last time, a breath filled with that impossible warmth. A tiny, choked sound. She pulled back, her heart hammering against her ribs. The pup shuddered. A thin, reedy wail escaped its throat. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. Its chest rose, then fell, on its own. It cried again, a sound of protest and life. Tears streamed down Alara's face as she hugged the squirming, crying pup to her chest. It was warm, truly warm. She had done it. She had breathed for it until it cried. A low groan from the floor startled her. The man. His eyes were open, not brown, not blue, but a startling pale silver, like the winter sky. They were fixed on her, on the crying pup in her arms. She froze, suddenly terrified. He was awake. He was a stranger, a huge, powerful stranger, and she was alone with him in her tiny cabin at the edge of the world. His gaze was intense, unreadable. It held no gratitude, no relief. Just a deep, searching intensity that seemed to peel her open, to look right through her skin and at the frantic, fluttering bird of her soul. He didn't speak. He just watched her, his silver eyes reflecting the firelight. "He's all right," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The pup, he's all right." The man's gaze flickered from her to the pup, then back again. A muscle worked in his jaw. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Alara's fear began to curdle into a different kind of anxiety. He wasn't threatening. He was watching, evaluating. Slowly, he pushed himself up onto one elbow. The movement was fluid, filled with a contained power that belied his injury. The blanket slipped, revealing a chest and shoulders corded with muscle and crisscrossed with old scars. White, faded lines that spoke of countless battles. "Who are you?" His voice was a low rumble, like stones grinding together deep underground. It was rough from disuse, but it held an undeniable note of command. "Ilara," she managed. "I live here. I found you on the beach." He said nothing, his silver eyes still locked on her. She felt like a mouse being observed by a hawk. He wasn't going to hurt her, she sensed that. But he was dangerous. The very air around him hummed with it. The pup squirmed, rooting against her neck. She stroked its back, her touch automatic and soothing. The man's eyes followed the movement of her hand. "He was gone," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. His heart had stopped. Ilara swallowed. He was cold. I warmed him. He just needed help. She couldn't explain what had happened. The warmth, the feeling of life pouring from her. She didn't understand it herself. To him, it would sound like madness. He continued to stare, his expression unreadable. Then, with painstaking slowness, he sat up fully, his back against the stone of the hearth. He held out his hands, not in a gesture of threat, but an offering, a request. Hesitantly, Ilara shifted closer. She gently placed the warm, wriggling pup into his large, scarred hands. His fingers, long and calloused, dwarfed the tiny creature. He cradled it with an astonishing gentleness, his touch infinitely careful. He brought the pup close to his face, burying his nose in its fur. His eyes closed for a moment, and when they opened, the hard silver seemed to have softened just a fraction. A deep, profound grief swam in their depths. "His name is Ash," the man said, his voice softer now. "He is all I have left." Those words hung in the air, filled with a history of loss so immense Ilara could feel the weight of it in the small cabin. This was no mere stray. This pup was a lifeline, a remnant. The man, she didn't know his name, looked back at her. The suspicion was gone, replaced by a raw, aching vulnerability. "You saved him." "I'm a healer," she said simply, as if that explained everything. "No," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You are something more." He didn't ask for her help to stay, and she didn't offer to make him leave. An unspoken agreement settled between them. He was too weak to travel, and she was too compassionate to send him out into the battered landscape. He introduced himself only as Kale. The days that followed fell into a strange, quiet rhythm. Kale was a silent presence in her small home. He spent hours by the fire, watching the flames, with Ash asleep on his chest. The unnatural cold still clung to him. Even near the roaring fire, his skin remained cool to the touch when she changed the dressing on his head wound. The bond between them was the pup. Ash was a tiny, demanding monarch. Ilara mashed fish and herbs for him, and Kale would feed him from his fingertip. They would watch him stumble around the cabin on clumsy paws, chasing dust motes in the sunbeams. In those moments, watching the giant, broken man smile faintly at the pup's antics, the cold stone of Ilara's loneliness would feel a little bit warmer. Intimacy grew in the silence. It was in the way he would watch her grind herbs, his silver eyes tracking her every movement. It was in the way she would leave a bowl of her clam chowder by his side without a word, and find it empty later. It was in the shared responsibility for this tiny, fragile life. One evening she was tending to her small garden as the sun bled into the sea. She heard him come up behind her. She didn't startle. She had become attuned to his presence, the quiet weight of him. "Your pack," he said, his voice low. "They cast you out." It wasn't a question. He saw it in her, the way she held herself. The faint brand of the omega that was faded but still visible on her wrist if you knew where to look. She didn't turn around. She kept weeding, her knuckles brushing the damp earth. "They said I was useless." He was silent for a long time. She could feel his gaze on her back. "They were fools," he said finally. The words were simple, stated as plain fact, but they hit her with the force of a physical blow. No one had ever defended her. No one had ever taken her side. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting back a sudden sharp sting. "Why are you here, Kale?" she asked, her voice tight. "Hiding at the edge of the world." He didn't answer immediately. The only sound was the cry of the gulls and the sigh of the waves. "I am paying a debt," he said at last, his voice thick with a guilt so old it was part of his bones. "Ash is the last piece of it. I failed his family. I failed them all. I will not fail him." She finally turned to look at him. In the fading light, his face was a mask of old pain. He wasn't just a man hiding. He was a man haunted. This remote stretch of coast was his self-imposed prison. That night, a fever took him. The head wound, which had seemed to be healing, had become infected. He began to shiver, but his skin was burning hot. The deep, internal cold had been replaced by a raging fire. He tossed and turned on his pallet, muttering names she didn't know, words from a life she couldn't imagine. Ilara worked tirelessly. She bathed his face with cool water, forced bitter teas between his lips, and changed the poultice on his wound every hour. Ash whined anxiously, refusing to leave his side, curling up in the hollow of his neck. For 2 days she fought for him. She was exhausted, running on nothing but stubborn will and fear. She dozed in a chair by his side, jerking awake at his every groan. During one of his lucid moments, his hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. His silver eyes were clouded with fever, but they were fixed on her. "Don't leave," he rasped, a desperate plea. "I'm not going anywhere," she promised, her voice soft. She placed her other hand over his, her skin against his. His was blazing hot, but as she held on, she felt it again. That strange, gentle warmth flowing from her palm into his skin. It wasn't like the desperate surge that had saved Ash. This was quieter. A gentle, steady current. She watched, fascinated, as the frantic pulse under her thumb began to slow, to even out. Kale's breathing deepened. The frantic energy left him, and he sank into a true, healing sleep. Ilara stared at her hand, then at his peaceful face. What was this? This power that lived inside her? The pack had called her barren, empty. But she was not empty. She was full. Full of something she didn't understand. Something that gave life and soothed pain. Something powerful. Kale's fever broke the next morning. The recovery was slow, but steady. The incident had changed something between them. The careful distance was gone, replaced by a quiet, fragile intimacy. He would watch her, a question always in his eyes. And she, in turn, found herself watching him, her heart doing a strange, unfamiliar flutter when his gaze met hers. He started to help her. He would chop wood for her hearth, his powerful swings making short work of the logs. He repaired the section of her roof the storm had damaged, moving with an easy competence. They worked together in comfortable silence, their shared tasks a form of conversation. One afternoon, he found her on the beach, staring out at the gray expanse. "What do you see out there?" he asked, his voice right behind her. "A way out," she confessed, her voice small. "And a wall. Both at the same time." He came to stand beside her, his presence a warm, solid wall against the wind. "I know the feeling." They stood like that for a long time, two lonely souls on the edge of the world, finding a strange comfort in their shared isolation. The little pup, Ash, now strong and bold, tumbled at their feet, chasing the waves. It was a fragile peace. Ilara knew it. Peace was not a thing she was meant to have. And one day, the past came to reclaim her. She saw her first. A figure on the cliffs overlooking the cove, silhouetted against the morning sky. Just a shape, too far to make out. But a cold dread trickled down Ilara's spine. No one ever came here. 2 days later, there was a knock on her door. Kale was out, checking the snares he'd set. Ash was asleep by the fire. Ilara's heart hammered as she opened the door a crack. It was Briar, her stepsister. Her face was arranged in a mask of worried concern that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "Ilara? Oh, thank the goddess I found you," she cried, rushing forward to embrace her. Ilara stood stiffly in her arms, the scent of Briar's expensive perfumes, a jarring intrusion in her world of salt and herbs. "Briar, what are you doing here?" "I was so worried. You just vanished. Father has been beside himself." Briar's eyes darted around the small, clean cabin, taking in the single cot, the man-sized blankets by the fire, the herbs hanging from the rafters. A flicker of distaste, then something else. Speculation. You've been living like this? All alone? I haven't been alone, Alara said quietly, her hand instinctively going to the sleeping pup. Briar's gaze sharpened. Our scouts reported a strange energy signature from this area. A powerful male. We thought you might be in danger. Her eyes landed on the blankets by the fire, the large pair of worn boots tucked beside them. It seems you found a protector. The lie was so smooth, so practiced. Briar wasn't worried. She was hunting. He was injured. I helped him, Alara said, her voice flat. Briar's smile was thin, predatory. Of course you did. You always were one for taking in strays. Her gaze fell to Ash, and her smile tightened. How quaint. Kyle returned an hour later, a brace of rabbits in his hand. He stopped dead in the doorway when he saw Briar. His silver eyes went from her to Alara, and a shuttered, wary look came over his face. Briar, for her part, was struck dumb for a moment. She stared at Kyle, at the raw power that rolled off him in waves, at the regal bearing that no injury or ragged clothes could hide. This was no mere rogue. This was power. And her weak, useless stepsister had found him first. Jealousy, dark and venomous, flooded her eyes. And you are? Briar asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she recovered. A guest, Kale said, his voice a low warning. He walked past her, placing the rabbits on the table and moving to stand near Alara, a silent, protective wall. Briar's visit lasted 3 days. 3 days of cloying sweetness, of backhanded compliments to Alara, and flirtatious glances at Kale. Kale ignored her completely, his attention solely on Alara and Ash. This, of course, only fueled Briar's fury. She saw the bond growing between them, the quiet looks, the shared smiles over the pup. She saw the way Kale looked at Alara, as if she were the only person in the world. And she saw the strange vitality of the pup, a runt that should have died, now thriving under Alara's care. On the 3rd night, Briar made her move. She cornered Kale while Alara was gathering muscles at the tide line. You should be careful of her, Briar said, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. She's not what she seems. Kale just looked at her, his silver eyes cold as ice. She's an Omega. Cursed. Briar pressed on, her voice filled with feigned pity. Nothing she touches thrives. It's why our pack cast her out. Anything she tries to nurture, it withers. It's a sad thing. She glanced towards the cabin. That pup. It's a miracle it's still alive. But her curse? It's a slow poison. It will catch up. It always does. The words were poison, aimed with perfect precision at the one festering wound in Kale's soul. His guilt. His failure. The family he had lost, which he blamed himself for. The idea that he had brought another fragile life into the orbit of a curse? It was a dagger to the heart. When Alara returned, the atmosphere in the cabin was glacial. Kyle wouldn't look at her. He stood by the window, staring out at the sea, his shoulders rigid. Briar sat by the fire, a smug, triumphant look on her face. What is it? Alara asked, her own heart beginning to freeze. Kale turned, and the look in his eyes shattered her. The warmth, the fragile trust they had built, was gone. In its place was his old, deep-seated pain, twisted now with suspicion and fear. Is it true? He asked, his voice rough. Are you cursed? The question stole her breath. They said so, she stammered. But it's not. She can't help it. Briar interjected smoothly. She was born that way. Kale looked at Ash, sleeping peacefully in his basket. He looked at the pup, the last remnant of his past, the one thing he had sworn to protect. And he looked at Alara, at the Omega brand on her wrist. Briar's poison had found fertile ground in his guilt. He couldn't risk it. He couldn't risk another failure. "You need to leave," he said to Briar, his voice flat and dead. A flicker of surprise, then triumph in Briar's eyes. She stood. "Of course, I'll just get my things." She shot Alara a look of pure victory before disappearing into the small alcove Alara had given her. Alara's world was crumbling. "Kyle." He wouldn't meet her eyes. He walked over and gently picked up the sleeping pup. He wrapped him in a blanket, his movements stiff and deliberate. "What are you doing?" she whispered, dread coiling in her stomach. "I can't let him be harmed," Kyle said, his voice hollow. He finally looked at her, and the agony in his eyes was unbearable. It was the look of a man tearing himself in two. "I can't risk you." The words were meant to be a kindness, a protection. "I can't risk what you might do to him." That's what she heard. He believed it. He believed she was poison. Briar returned, cloaked and ready. She paused at the door. "Goodbye, sister. Do try to stay out of trouble." Kale walked to the door, holding Ash tight against his chest. He didn't look back. "Kale, please," Alara begged, tears finally breaking free. "Don't listen to her. Don't do this." He paused in the doorway, his back to her. "I failed his family," he said, his voice choked with grief. "I will not fail him." And then he was gone. He followed Briar out into the twilight, leaving Alara alone in her suddenly vast, empty cabin. The door swung shut, and the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the frantic, broken hammering of her own heart. She had been found, and then she had been lost all over again. The silence he left behind was 1,000 times louder than the loneliness she had known before. The days that followed were a gray, featureless hell. The cabin, once a sanctuary, was now a tomb filled with his ghost. His scent lingered on the blankets. The chair he sat in seemed to hold his shape. Every corner held a memory of a shared glance, a quiet moment. Alara moved through her chores like an automaton, her heart a numb, heavy stone in her chest. The sea mocked her with its indifference. The wind howled his name. She had been so stupid. To hope. To let that fragile bird in her chest take flight. She had known peace was not for her. He had looked at her and seen a curse. The same thing her pack had seen. The same thing she had always, deep down, believed about herself. Briar hadn't needed to do much. She had only needed to give voice to the monster of Alara's own self-doubt. Meanwhile, Kale was living his own private nightmare. He and Briar had traveled back toward the Heartlands. He was the Alpha King, a truth Briar had quickly surmised and was now eager to exploit. She saw him as her prize, her ticket to the throne. Kale let her believe it. His mind was a maelstrom of grief and confusion. He had left Alara to protect Ash, but the act felt like a betrayal of his own soul. Worse, Ash was not thriving. Away from Alara, the pup's vitality began to fade. His coat grew dull, his appetite waned. He became listless, whining softly in his sleep. Kale tried everything. The best healers in the central packs were summoned. They found nothing wrong with the pup. No disease, no injury. He was simply fading. Kale watched, his heart turning to ice. Briar's words echoed in his head. Her curse. It's a slow poison. It will catch up. He thought he had saved Ash from it, but what if the curse had already taken root? What if leaving her had only accelerated it? Doubt began to eat at him. He remembered the look on Alara's face, the devastation. He remembered her hands on him, soothing his fever. He remembered her breath giving life back to Ash's still body. Was that the work of a curse? Or a miracle? Briar, seeing her leverage over him weakening as the pup faded, grew desperate. She had brought the great Alpha King to heal, but her prize was slipping through her fingers. If the pup died, she would lose her hold. She consulted with an old crone, a practitioner of the dark arts her family had long kept ties with. The crone gave her a vial of colorless liquid, a true poison, one that mimicked a wasting sickness. A way to finalize the curse Ilara had supposedly started. One night she administered it to the pup. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Ash began to convulse, a terrible foam frothing at his mouth. His cries were thin and full of agony. Kyle roared, a sound of pure fury and terror. He snatched up the pup, his mind shattering. He had failed. Again. In his effort to protect Ash, he had led him right into death's arms. The guilt he had carried for centuries erupted, a black tidal wave of self-hatred and despair. It consumed him. His strength fled. The immense power he held as Alpha King guttered like a dying flame. He collapsed, his own body racked with sympathetic agony, his life force draining away with the pup's. He was dying. And his last coherent thought was of her. Ilara. Back in her cabin, Ilara woke with a gasp. A sharp psychic pain had lanced through her, so intense it felt physical. She clutched her chest, her heart pounding. Ash. His name was a scream in her mind. Kyle. She knew. With a certainty that defied all logic, she knew they were in mortal danger. The bond she had felt with them, the one she had thought was broken, was screaming for her. There was no hesitation. She threw on her cloak, grabbed her satchel of essential herbs, and ran. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she had to go east, back toward the lands she had fled. She let the desperate pull in her soul be her compass. She ran for a day and a night, her body fueled by adrenaline and terror. The pull grew stronger, a frantic, pulsing beacon of pain. It led her to a large, temporary encampment. The banners of the central packs hung limp in the still air. Guards, seeing a wild-looking woman running from the woods, tried to stop her. "Let me pass," she cried, her voice raw. "The king is dying." Her desperation, her wild certainty gave them pause. At that moment, Briar, drawn by the commotion, appeared from the central tent. Her face went pale with shock, then twisted into a mask of fury when she saw Ilara. "Seize her!" Briar shrieked. "She's the witch who cursed the king's pup. She's come to finish the job." The guards moved to grab Ilara, but she dodged them. She could feel it now. Kale's life force, so faint, so close to extinguishing. She ran straight for the king's tent, the source of the pain. She burst through the flaps and stopped dead. The scene was one of utter despair. Kale was on the floor, kneeling over the still, small body of Ash. He was convulsing, his face gray, his silver eyes rolled back in his head. His own life was guttering out in sympathy and unbearable guilt. "Kale!" she screamed, rushing to his side. Briar was right behind her. "Get away from him, you monster!" She drew a dagger, her eyes burning with madness. "I won't let you harm him." Ilara ignored her. She fell to her knees beside Kale. She touched his face. It was colder than it had been on the beach, a deathly, absolute cold. His life was slipping away with every shuddering breath. The pup, Ash, was already gone. No. That same defiant rage rose in her, 10 times stronger than before. She would not let this happen. She had saved Ash once. She would save them both now. She placed one hand on Ash's tiny, still chest and the other on Kale's heart. She closed her eyes, shutting out Briar's hateful screams, shutting out the world. She focused on the tiny, fragile flicker of Kale's life and the utter emptiness where Ash's had been. She refused to let him go. She poured everything she was into her hands, her love for the broken, gentle man, her fierce affection for the pup, her rage at Briar, her grief for the life they had almost had. She poured all of it into him, a desperate, silent prayer. "Live, please, live." The warmth came, not the gentle trickle from before, but a flood. A torrent of pure, liquid sunlight erupted from her hands. It was blinding. A wave of force, of life, exploded from her, throwing Briar back against a tent pole, where she crumpled in a heap. The light filled the tent, a brilliant, silent detonation of healing power. It sank into Kale, into ash, a tide of pure creation. It was not a curse. It was its absolute opposite. It was life itself. Alara felt the power surge through her, a wild, untamable river. It was terrifying and glorious. It was who she was. Not a barren omega, not a curse. She was a healer, a life-giver. Under her hands, she felt a change. The deathly cold in Kale's body was driven back, replaced by a steady, living warmth. The frantic, failing rhythm of his heart smoothed, strengthened, and began to beat with a powerful, regal certainty. The gray, ashen color of his skin receded, replaced by healthy life, and under her other hand, a miracle. A tiny fluttering beat, then another, Ash's heart. The light receded, drawing back into Alara, leaving her breathless and shaking, but whole. The tent was silent. Kale's eyes opened. The clouds of pain, of guilt, of despair were gone. His silver eyes were clear, sharp, and focused entirely on her. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not a curse, but his salvation. Alara, he breathed. Her name was a prayer. Then a thin, weak cry. Ash. The pup stirred, lifted his head, and licked her hand. The poison was gone, purged by her light. Tears streamed down Alara's face. She had done it. Kale reached out, his hand gentle on her cheek. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I believed her. I let my own demons blind me to what you are." "What am I?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You are my heart," he said, his thumb stroking her skin. "You are my hope. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you breathe life into him. And my own fear and guilt almost destroyed all of us." He pulled her closer, his gaze intense. "I love you, Alara. Even if it kills me, I love you." She leaned into his touch, a sob of relief and joy escaping her. "I love you too," she confessed, the words feeling like coming home. He leaned in and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of reverence. A kiss of promises made and futures reclaimed. It was the taste of salt and herbs and second chances. When they broke apart, his guards were standing in the tent flap, staring in awe at the scene. At their king, vibrant and whole. At the pup, alive and well. And at the small, unassuming woman who had single-handedly wrought a miracle. Briar was being hauled to her feet, her face a mask of disbelief and hatred. "She poisoned him," Kale said, his voice quiet but ringing with absolute authority. His eyes, fixed on Briar, were glacial. "Take her to the dungeons. She will answer for her treason." Briar shrieked and struggled, but the guards dragged her away. The pack had a new witch to condemn, but this time, they had the right one. Kale turned back to Alara. He gently took her hand, the one that still bore the faded mark of the Omega, and brought it to his lips. "They called you useless," he murmured against her skin. "But your curse is the greatest gift this world has ever known. It is the power of life itself, the power this kingdom needs, the power I need." He stood, pulling her to her feet. He picked up Ash, who was now wriggling with energy, and settled him in the crook of Alara's arm. "Home. Come," Kyle said, his hand finding hers, their fingers lacing together. "Let's go home. Our real home." 3 months later, Alara stood on a balcony overlooking the capital city. The northern sea was a distant memory, replaced by rolling green hills and a city teeming with life. She was no longer Alara the exile, Alara the Omega. She was Alara, the life-giver, the queen. The castle was vast and cold, but she was slowly filling it with warmth. Herbs grew in pots on every sunny windowsill. The servants, at first terrified of her, now came to her with their ailments and their heartaches, and she soothed them all. Kale came to stand behind her, wrapping his strong arms around her waist. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his presence a constant, reassuring warmth at her back. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "About a little cabin by the sea," she said softly, "and a man who was as cold as a glacier." He chuckled, the sound vibrating through her. "That man is gone. You melted him." He turned her in his arms, his silver eyes soft and full of a love that still sometimes stole her breath. "Are you happy here?" She looked at him, at the king who had been broken and was now whole. She looked at the city, thriving under a just and compassionate rule. She looked down at the young wolf chasing butterflies on the balcony lawn. Ash was no longer a runt, but a strong, sleek animal, a living symbol of their impossible love. She had a home, she had a family, she had a purpose. The worthlessness she had carried for so long was a distant ghost, burned away by the sun of his love and her own discovered power. "Yes," she said, her heart full to bursting. "I'm happy." He smiled, a true, brilliant smile that lit up his entire face. "Good," he said, before leaning down to kiss her, "because I have a feeling our story is just beginning." And as he held her, she knew he was right. The world was wide, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of it. She was ready to meet it, with her king by her side and the power of life in her hands.